Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Thanks, everyone, for joining me here today. Before we dive into our very first interview, or at least official interview, we've done interviews in the past, but we are starting a new Thursday tradition, and that is going to be bringing on a guest expert. Today, we have Gabby Reece to kick off our new series of guest experts. Gabby is someone that I've wanted to chat with for a while. She lives an absolutely amazing life by most people's standards and is able to seemingly do it all. She has a family, she's engaged in sports, engages in business, owns a business with her husband, owns her own businesses, and keeps herself fit, gets herself into meditation, recovery, all of the things that most of us want to do, and we get to listen to her to figure out how it is that we're able to put all of this together, get the most out of life. So really great conversation. I loved chatting with her. She's an amazing woman. I do hope that you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Enjoy. Gabby, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I didn't know we had so many mutual pathways.
Sometimes that happens, every once in a while, get reintroduced. And friends of ours had wanted us to get in touch, or at least me get in touch with you for some time because of a lot of the work that you do. And we will be talking about that with XBT and with recovery. A lot of what we do in our health-based world is not just about the training. The training is great, and there's so many different modalities. There's so much that you can do. But once you move out of your, let's say, early 30s, your recovery becomes just as important as your training. And so I can't wait to chat about that with you. And, 30 years of you being a professional athlete, certainly leading the way. And I believe that you still hold a couple of world records or work records in volleyball, which is pretty amazing. They haven't been broken. You're an athlete, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're an entrepreneur. You've done acting. And I believe you have, your podcast is now a couple of years old. Is that correct? Gabby Reece Show?
Actually, I used to do a podcast with a gentleman named Neil Strauss called The Truth Barrel.
Yes.
And so that we did for a couple of years. Then we both kind of took a break. Just, it's hard to schedule not only your schedule, but your co-host schedule and a guest schedule. And Neil went off to do an incredible podcast called, it's like To Live and Die in LA. It's like a really well produced one. And then I started mine only in January.
Got it. And I believe, you're with the new media company, Dare Media, I believe. Yeah. And I'm friends with them as well. So that's great. It's good to have you on the show. One of the reasons why, I really wanted to interview you, we're starting a new series of conversations with people and really looking at their life experience and what they've been through, the good and the bad, the different struggles. It's my belief that as people struggle in life, they begin to grow. They start to learn different sides of themselves. And then with that, they accumulate wisdom. It's with that wisdom that we can then share that with others. So a lot of people, I would say, would look at your career and everything that you do and kind of start with, well, what are you doing? Like, what's big at the moment? But I would love to hear, how do you even morph into an individual that has done so much in their time on this earth? Like, where does it start? What led you, do you believe, into this life of doing more? And I don't mean that from a negative standpoint, but it's like you're balancing being a mom, a wife, an entrepreneur, all of these different things. You've written a book. So where does that come from?
I've gotten asked versions of this question before. And like, if you're being totally honest obviously I do believe people are born with different types of capacity, right? Like I have a friend who I just was talking to that's a Navy SEAL. And it's like, his ability to manage and deal with the amount is probably more than most people, right? And I think that's something he's born with. I think if you said to me, why was I doing all these things? Really, it probably started out of fear, of needing to take care of myself. And also, and innately being able to recognize things that made me different or things that were given to me as my gifts. Like we all have things that we're sort of better at. And I don't even mean in comparison to another person. It's just, I always say it's like your high cards, right? Like if we all, connected to our deck, like some people might be like, I organize things very well. I'm very creative, whatever that is. So I think fear combined with really understanding things that I could probably contribute, what were my high cards. And then later, I would say it changed though into recognizing and valuing opportunity. I don't know that even to this day, I really, for whatever reason, when I am experiencing an opportunity or I know that there's an opportunity in front of me, I value it. And so what happens when you value it, you'll take care of it, you'll work hard. And that usually then provides you with more opportunities.
Sure.
And so it's, it's all of that.
What were some of the high cards do you feel like you were dealt right away? You knew maybe at a young age or teenager. Of course, you went on to play professional volleyball. So I'm assuming part of that is athletics, but I think there's a certain mindset that comes along with it. I mean, there's a lot of athletes out there, but not everybody moves to that highest level. So what were some of those attributes that you kind of recognized that other people might recognize in themselves as well?
I think that I have the innate ability. I think I can follow instructions well. So I can take information and let's say if we're in the realm of athletics, I can turn it into a movement. Well, I don't know that I'm the most athletic person. Obviously, I'm pretty tall. I'm 6'3". So let's say what's interesting is maybe the obvious cards for me were my size. And later when I was able to go into fashion before I became a professional athlete, that helped pay the bills. There was a certain package that my avatar was a certain way that sort of allowed me these experiences. Those were the really obvious ones. And then once you get into it, you start to know who you are. And so, for example, coachable. I would have coaches. If I trusted the coach, I can go through the wall for the coach. If we're going to work, I may not be the most talented, but I'm going to work really, really hard. And if I go to work, let's say if I was going to a shoot and living in New York, I would be on time and you would never hear a peep out of me how long the day was. So I think I have a little bit of a grinding mentality, I would say, which, listen, that has its benefits. And then later you have to rejigger that as you move through your life. So I think that my high cards, if you will, were really physically the obvious stuff. But let me tell you, that also is a problem.
I was just going to ask you about that. So I wanted to ask you, was there a trying time as a teenager? I don't know when you grew to 6'3", but with many women, obviously, you're hitting puberty a little bit earlier than men. And if you're 6'3", is there an uncomfortable stage before you own that?
Well, listen, I was 6'3" by 15, and I would actually say that's not the troubling time. I mean, what's great about that is you're sort of, you're never like everyone else, supposedly, at the time in your life. I have a 12-year-old daughter right now. It's like they all dress the same. They're all trying to have the same hairstyle. It's that thing. And then older we get, then we're trying to find our own identity and all these things. So what was cool for me, I got to avoid all that. I was 6 feet at 12. I wasn't going to fit in. I wasn't going to necessarily look like the other girls. So I bypassed that thought process and learned to just ride it out, feeling like I would go places and people would stare at me or thought I was much older than I chronologically was. However, actually what I was going to say is the bigger issue, it's like little girls that are pretty, right? And everywhere. And then people will comment. They're 3, they're 4, they're 5, they're 10, they're 12. Oh, she's so pretty. What a pretty little girl. What a pretty. The problem with that is if you buy into that narrative, it stunts you in a different way. You don't develop your own. Now all of a sudden you think, oh, I just show up and I have to just be pretty. And so, or athletic. So in a way, what's interesting is my high cards were really a gift to me and they helped me get out and create opportunity. But I, for whatever reason, understood very, very early, you better be about a lot of things. My mother was a very beautiful woman. And I think that it held her back from developing certain work ethics and skill sets because people almost let you get by. And then what happens? You turn 30 or 35, and now it's like a different story. And so I guess for me, my point of saying this is saying, hey, I was very clear about what the cards were, but I also understood do not rely on that because that will be actually the death of you. So the thing that is it's like the thing that's our curse or family background, or I had, people who are dyslexic, but they learn to overcompensate. Now they're the CEO. It is our gift. But if we don't know how to manage the gift in a real way, where we're continuing to evolve as a human being, with a skill set that we're in charge of, not what the outside world gets to judge us on, I think that it can be a really tricky thing. So I always say to people, like, you ultimately want to develop yourself, because no matter what happens in your life, whether it's age or people's preferences about your appearance, especially, for women, when you're good at something, that's in your pocket for you. And that's really, really powerful.
So, and I'd love to hear, I went through a health challenge essentially when I was 17 years old, and that forced me to grow up really fast. When doctors don't know what's wrong with you and your body's essentially shutting down, you're not like the other kids as well. And so you begin to just learn that that's okay after a while. You accept that. And, I would almost say in the end, you don't think about it in the moment, it makes you a much better, more interesting person because you've gone through these trials that a lot of other people haven't, or if they have, it's much later in life. So you get to kind of grow up faster in a way. Now you're doing well, you're excelling in sports. When was the turning point for you where you said to yourself, because you very easily could have continue with professional sports. You could have, and not saying that you're not athletic and doing things today, which you are. So there's that transition period, but you didn't have to really move in a different direction. You could have kept with that lifestyle. So what made the shift? Was there an event that you said, oh, there's got to be more to this? What happened?
I think there's a couple things. I think one, I was always really clear about when you're in a moment that it's like kind of going pretty well, but there's sort of a finite period of time, that then it's really important, and not prematurely, but to always be in touch with, yes, who am I now, but who am I also hoping to become? Because I think what happens in especially sports, it's so easy, is you have to focus so intently on what you're doing, and it takes so much of your time and energy to train and then compete. And then you get spit out of that process, and then you have to go like, oh, what do I want to do? And then another thing happens, and I've talked about this before, it's weird how doors open up for you more readily when you're in it and you have momentum than, oh, well, you're retired from that sport and now you're asking people to help you. It actually is harder. And it's not fair, but it kind of is the way it is. And I think also I think the blessing, it'd be like your health challenge and now you get into healing people. It makes perfect sense. I think the challenge of being in a really small platform like beach volleyball always made me clear that there was so many limitations. And so I always kept my mind open about, well, what other ways could I contribute into my professional life? What other things could I be good at? And so I always did TV when I was competing in my off season or wrote, and then really leaving at the time that feels good for you versus you can't do it anymore. And also I was dealing with my knee, and that was a little bit of a trick, but I think it was really understanding there's a lot of runway ahead of me. And what is that? I need to build that so that it's sort of built up when I'm now ready for the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the smartest thing athletes in general can look at, because no matter what sport you're in, and I'm a New England fan, so of course I see Tom Brady playing into his early 40s, and you say, well, look at what he's doing. He is really taking care of his body. He understands that that's the tool in which he's able to play the game. But for the average athlete, a professional athlete, let's just take the NFL, for example, your career is about 3 years long. And so you always, if you're one of the smart athletes, and that's why I really believe all athletes should have some type of business manager, it's taking advantages, being in the moment, but then saying, okay, this is a finite period of time. What am I going to be doing next? And just like you said, don't wait until the end in order to then open up that next door. Since people do want to talk to, if things are going well in your life, no matter what it is, people are interested in that it opens doors. They want to talk. You're able to meet other people. And I think that goes for pretty much any type of lifestyle or any type of career that someone's in. So let's say that you're moving out of the acting, you're moving out of the modeling and the professional sports mode. What's the next avenue that you take? Kind of what's that next growth progression?
I was always interested in business, and then simultaneously I was starting to have children. I met my husband when I was 25, and he already had a very young daughter. So we were only part-time. Her mom is was her mom, great mom. And so I didn't have my own biological children until 8 years into my relationship. So that brought me into my early 30s. So that was also a time I tucked back a little. Just it's not, the biological demand, whether it's nursing or the pull to be with your small children, you tuck back a bit. I mean, for me personally, I always joke about, new moms being like, I just need a minute to myself. And you go drive somewhere, maybe it's to the grocery store or something. And all of a sudden you're like, I need to get back, because it's like the pull is so powerful. So, but simultaneously to that, I was, I always say that I stoked the fire a little bit. I would do enough strategic work to at least kind of keep some opportunities around. It's definitely not easy because you feel really vulnerable at that time. I feel like pregnancy and being a mom of very young children it's an incredibly empowering time, and it's an incredibly vulnerable time because the pull to be a caregiver, but also simultaneously being aware of your own identity kind of temporarily dissolving, and then trying to navigate, how do I keep a hold of who I am as a human being, a person defined as a woman, not as somebody's mom, not as somebody's wife. And I think I always knew that I would not be a happy person, that if I didn't keep at least my own self a little bit within all of this. So I think I worked on that. And that actually started really with my own self-care, meaning if I had 15 minutes to train, so it wasn't even just professional, I knew I needed to take care of myself so that I could, in fact, be of service to the people in my home. And I was really intense about not getting eaten up by them. And not that they were doing it on purpose. They will take whatever you'll give them, and you want to give them whatever they want. And you have to be smart enough to go, this is going to get me later if I'm not careful about taking care of myself. And I'm probably going to be mad at everybody. And it will only be my own fault.
I mean, I think that's extremely important. I see that with my wife, and I see that with our online community as well. I think it's one of the hardest things to do is like you want to be the best mom in the world, but you also have your career. There's other aspirations. There's a million things that you want. But what happens is, and I think a lot of women, and explain it how you did, that there's like these certain stages of life, right? But you don't want to not think about the next stage while you're also, when your children are quite young. So can you just share maybe a tip or two of how not to feel guilty about taking care of yourself while you have young kids, what that means for you in the moment, how you might be able to be better for them, but also don't put it off 10 years because that's going to make it more challenging 10 years later.
Listen, if I could just be really direct, I think guilt, for whatever reason, it's a parallel path with parenting, especially for women. I don't know what it is with us. And I don't know if it's because it's such a really important job, the most important job, that it's like, oh, I always joke like, well, do I not let them suffer enough? Am I too nice? Do I bend over too much? Do I give them too much? Do I love them enough? Have I played enough blocks with them? Then the other day, my kids are big now, 12 and 16 and 25. I'm like, I didn't read enough to these kids. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I don't know that it's about not feeling guilty. I think it's about clarity and saying, that's right, I'm going to feel guilty. And but I know it's like the truth. I know I'm not going to go wrong by making sure that I am taking care of myself. And if you have to get philosophical about it, for moms who have daughters, oh, you're being an example to your daughters about healthy lifestyle habits, whatever BS you have to tell yourself to just get it done. If you have sons, you're saying this is also how women can be. They can be nurturing and strong and smart and work hard. I will say this. I heard something maybe a few years ago from a woman named Byron Katie, and we talked about, because I do. I mean, I didn't have a great childhood, so I really was concerned about being a good parent and insecure about that. And I think my daughters also secretly know this, like they know how to leverage me. But she said to me, really, the two best things maybe you could do for your kids is listen, not fix it, not tell them why they shouldn't feel that way or shouldn't suffer. Just listen and make yourself happy so that they know what that looks like. So they see somebody who knows how to make them not like, well, I used to do all this fun stuff, but then you were born. And so then I gave all that up. But listen, I think the whole thing behind parenting is we're not supposed to get it right. I've looked at it from so many angles, and I think we're not supposed to get it right. I think that's actually part of what it's all about. And it's also for us, the parents, whether we like it or not, this is a learning time for us. And we think we're teaching them everything. But as I get deeper into it, I realize it is as much for me to learn for this next segment of my life, or to choose to or not. Some of us don't. And once we have harmony with that uncomfortable feeling, that is kind of how it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've realized two things with parenting. My girls are a little younger than your kids. Mine are 6 and 8 years old. But I knew from the beginning, because I didn't have my kids until my early to mid 30s, is that I realized that this is a stage of life, even though I'm so passionate about my work, that I need to focus on every day. But I also realized that you're not going to be able to be completely isolated and separate and present when you're home and then separate at work. There's this integration. And so I truly love the life that I live. And that's what I preach to people, meaning do work that you love, hang around with people that you love your family, so that it's all mixed together. So there'll be times where I have a meeting that runs late, not on purpose. It just happened. And so I'll do a FaceTime call before that meeting happens with my kids. But when I'm there with them, I am realizing at the moment that this age only happens once, that this moment is really only happening once. And so I look at it as, I'm going to do the things that I would regret not doing. I'm going to miss some things. Things are going to happen, but make sure you do the things that if you miss them and you would regret it later in life, that you at least do those, because we're all going to look back in hindsight. Kids are going to be out of the house eventually. You say, yeah, maybe I should have been more present. But at the same time, you can't beat yourself up, because you're also doing things in your life, in your prime, that you need to do as well, in order not just to take care of you, but to take care of others in your family too. So it's this vicious tug of war that I think all parents realize. Some, I think, being a little bit more self-aware that you never get the time back, but you also do need to take a little bit of that time for yourself. And just like you said, that I mean, kids listen. There's no doubt about it. They listen to you, but they watch you. They're always watching. My daughters can overhear us and see us from 2 rooms away. And so it's one of those things that, I make sure that when I get home from work, that I exercise and I bring them down and we're doing workouts together, so that they're seeing that this is just a normal thing. This is just what we do. And that we, have dinner together. That was a big thing with me, is dinner. Having dinner as a family. We're pulled in a million different directions. But if we can all share a meal together without phones, without TVs, then that's something that I would like to kind of create with my family, so that maybe in the future we continue on with that type of routine. So I agree with you. And I just am basically reiterating that it's a challenge, and I'm sure that it's not going to change, especially with teenagers as well.
Yeah. And if someone's out there and they're a single parent, it's sort of like giving yourself that extra love and support, because, hey, listen, at the end of the day, these are also luxury items to even talk about this, where if you're sort of saying, hey, I have to work X amount of hours a day just to keep everything rolling, and you're doing that for your well-being and your kids' well-being, then the lessons are in there for them too. So, I'm always reminded, like, if we're all just doing the best that we can, right, and to give ourselves a break, but to always be honest about how we're feeling. And if I did hear somebody say this the other day, and I thought it was important. He said, if you've ever dropped your kids off like at their friend's house or something, and right before they get out of the car, you go, hey, and they look at you and you look in their eyeballs and you're like, okay, have fun. I love you. That moment, like you're in the car and you're barely talking, or they're doing something and you're doing something, but then right when they're going to exit, right? This friend of mine was saying that sometimes he just like looks in his son's eyes. I mean, whatever. But my point is if we have those moments where you can look in your kid's eyes and they know, like, hey, my parents love me, and you got to go bust your ass and work for a 12-hour day, then that's okay too. You know?
Without a doubt. And for people who have to travel for work, whatever it might be, it's life isn't perfect. It's what we make of it. It's the story that unfolds in our life, but it also, I don't think that you have to be perfect for your children. And I don't know too many people that, a lot of people, I'm going to be honest, is like when you grow up and everything is perfect, I'm not sure that the struggle was always there. There's something about having to struggle at some point with something that makes you maybe strive for more, or it makes you look at life a little bit differently. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I would say, highlight that same point where you're not going to get it perfect. Life isn't perfect. And most likely, as long as you do show your children love, I think that's one of the biggest things, so they don't go looking for that somewhere else, that your kids are going to be okay. They really are. I think kids are pretty resilient.
Yeah. And you could be a great parent and one kid's doing thriving and one kid's loony. Like it just like we're not in charge of how do you know?
That's right. And you wrote a book a while back called My Foot is Too Big for That Glass Slipper. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I have a large foot, and I had written a book a long time ago, like in the 90s, called Big Girl in the Middle. And so I just kept the theme of, this is again like almost embracing one of your things. And so my foot was too big for the glass slipper was just this idea, because thinking that someone was going to come and rescue us and it was all going to be neat. And the subline was a guide to the less than perfect life, because I think that is, striving for everything to be completely buttoned up all the time, I think is like it's a no-win. So why don't we have those conversations about what really is important? And my whole thing was I wanted to write a book about really like self-care, but that's pretty unsexy. Who wants to talk about that? So I thought, okay, we could back it into a conversation of like, well, why don't you have time to exercise? Oh, because you have all these things that we've created as responsibilities that are supposedly so important, but are they? Let's look at that. So it was more about like a kind of having fun about conversation about that and about relationships and just reminding people at the end, it's good. Like your car is clean, your house is clean, your nails are done, but it'd be okay if your car was dirty and you decided to train instead. Like it's like really giving that reminder of like what people say that to me, like, oh, how do I get in shape? And I'm like, well, you first have to value it. You first have to think it's important. I could tell you everything, but if it never feels important, it's kind of a non-starter.
Yeah, I think most people will never spend the money or set aside the time if they don't value it. They'll never make it a priority in their life. And that's why, I certainly believe hiring a coach is a first great step, because they can inspire you. They can motivate you in the beginning to kind of get that ball rolling. And then hopefully, as you're starting to make strides, you actually see your body changing or you feel those neurotransmitters or endorphins being produced. Okay, then things start to catch on and you start with exercise, and maybe that leads to nutrition, and then that leads to an anti-inflammatory based plan, and all these different things I think can be great in your life. But there's, of course, that stepping stone. And I want to go through a lot of those principles in just a moment. But with staying with family just a moment, I'd love to hear, did you instill exercise and self-care and taking the time for your kids right from the beginning as part of your family? Or was that kind of, hey, let them take their own path, let them do what they want? Or did you feel like, hey, no, we're going to make this regimented, our kids are going to get into this so that they see the value?
I think, both my husband Laird and I are probably naturally pretty rebellious people, I would say. I don't think we're the most compliant people on the planet. And so typically you have children that are not so dissimilar from you. And what you said it earlier, we'll try to be the best example we can be. We'll try to make it seem like there's an element of fun in there, and that the value of that is greater than almost anything except the family and friends. And they find their way to it. All three of my girls have, and they also rebel against it too, because it's like, oh gosh. So we never made it structured. Never made it mandatory. Even the way they eat, because of what we eat overall, is really good. But it was never like, you can never have that. I don't have soda in my house, but like, if you want to have a chip, like, okay, like I'm not going to stop you, because sure. I don't want to make anything to do and have like a delayed reaction. Like they go to their friends and all they want to do is watch TV and whatever. It's like I always tell my girls, I'm not here to control you. I'm here to teach you how to control and manage yourself so you can go out in the world and manage that. And so you would think that we would be rigid. I just haven't really seen that work out. Not really, because we have to set them free at some point. Yes. And what are they going to do when we're not there? And so my thing is, yeah, go ahead. You want to eat like that, whatever food. And they know, like they're so informed about even like weird stuff with meats and things. I mean, I eat high quality meats, but like some of the funky stuff that goes on with meat, they know all of that info.
No meat glue in your family is what you're saying.
Exactly. And yeah. I had Anya Fernald here. She created Bel Campo. And when she talks about like what they do to chickens, like you'll never eat a chicken again,
No, it's one of the dirtiest animals out there. If you're not getting it pastured on a actual true
that's
farm.
What I mean. And definitely if someone's listening to this, you have a better shot of buying a whole chicken. That's always going to be the cleanest way, because of the intestinal tract is pretty fragile when they pluck it. And so it's not pretty.
No, it's not. So one of the things that I found most interesting when I was doing a little bit of research here before the show is that you split your time between Hawaii and California. And as someone with two young girls, I would love to hear what that's been like as a family. Obviously, well, for those people that don't know, your husband, Laird, is a big wave surfer, has been pretty much, I believe, his whole life, and does it to this day as well. I mean, that's a pretty amazing profession, of course. Now, do you go as a family from Hawaii to California, or is Laird staying back? Is he doing different competitions? What does that look like? And also, I'm interested personally because I love Hawaii. I love the West Coast as well, but I'm an East Coast person, always have been. And so I always think about the ideal world that I would live in would be from school year, from September through the holidays in December. I'm here on the East Coast. It's beautiful. We have snow, all those great things. But then from January through April, May, June, okay, I'm on the West Coast or I'm in Hawaii. You're one of the few people I think who really pulls that off. I would love to hear how you did that, what that looks like.
Well, also, I mean, if people work remotely, they can do it. But I met Laird in 95 and I was competing playing beach volleyball, which is a summertime sport. And big wave surfing, oddly, is actually a wintertime sport because the low pressures that bring large waves will bring the snowstorm in Chicago. It's just coming across it. The low pressure makes waves and then it moves across and it'll turn, to snow and such. So what we would do is, and before we had children, is we would be in California kind of from April, because I'd have to get prepared and start training, compete, and then big waves come kind of in October. So I would pretty much be done competing by September. I mean, maybe you'd have one competition in Brazil their summer, different hemisphere and such, but pretty much I'd be done competing in the States. And so then we would move to Hawaii and stay for his season, which pretty much ended in March. And so then when we started having children, when they were little babies, it's not a big deal. And then you could pop them into a kindergarten in both places because, again, that's not a big deal. And then once they started first grade, they would be with a proctor and a homeschool curriculum. And so we did that for 23 years. But then my youngest daughter, who's 12, kind of put her foot down about a year ago, requesting to be put into a more standard school. And because we're on the island of Kauai, which is where Laird is from, he grew up in Wainiha Valley there towards the end of the road. Kauai, it doesn't have the best setup for education. So we put her in a school here, which is funny because now they're not going to school. So we would do that literally 6 months. And, it's funny because you say you're going to adapt to your kids, and we have a kid who has very specific ideas about what she wants. And, her way of rebelling is like by being, quote, more normal. That's what she calls it. I'm like, yes. You'll figure out that there is no such thing as normal, but that's her story right now,
I mean, it's always interesting things, how they transgress and progress through life where a couple of the kids are okay with it. And then the youngest, again, maybe they want to fit in, like they said, be more normal or whatever that might mean.
I don't want to be a homeschool weird kid. I just want to be like a typical, that's what she said. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to fight this,
Right. But that worked for the whole family because you said you're 16-year-old and so they were okay.
Yeah, the 16-year-old plays tennis, so she's really in her homeschool. But it's going to be interesting to watch Laird and I juggle this for his season because we have made a commitment, and it's just actually natural. We didn't sit down and have a big conference about it, but that our family stays together. And so, for him, he's going to be probably making some compromises about being in Hawaii for when the swell arrives.
Yeah, well, that's a big part of his life, right? And so that's one of the things that I mentioned is I don't think Laird, again, I don't know Laird, but I'm assuming because I know of him that he wouldn't feel whole, he wouldn't feel complete without being able to surf a lot of those big waves, and especially out in Hawaii.
I think what I really have valued about Laird, one of the things is his pursuit of big wave surfing is so genuine. There's something so pure about it. It's a really simple thing of him wanting to go out in nature and be in those forces because I think it makes sense to him. It feels like it's very straightforward and fair. I think it also makes him feel like he's able to use a lot of his skill set for something. And I really appreciate that because it's not in pursuit of anything other than for the pursuit of the genuine love. It's never been about like some kind of outcome or anything like that. It's a very personal journey. And if anything, we had to make it, some of it public. So he made a living at it, to be honest. But I think Laird would have been okay just making this very personal pursuit because it gives him that feeling.
Sure. Yeah, no, it seems for sure like it's a part of him. And you can tell that it's genuine because it seems like whether the camera was on him or not, he's still going to do the same thing, which is great. Because I've seen a lot of the XBT material. I've heard him on the Joe Rogan show. And again, just personal acquaintances saying that he's the real deal. And same with yourself as well. I think you come at it from two different perspectives. And again, I might be incorrect in this assumption, but it does seem like you're really running a lot of the logistics. You're really making sure that whether it's Laird Superfoods or whether it's XBT, all these different things, that's actually happening. That's not just, oh yeah, it's part of a lifestyle, it's what we do, because that's great. But it's like, okay, how do we turn this into, it's not just a business, because whenever someone's in the health-based field, it's about helping people. It's like, hey, this is what we do. And it works for us. We'd love to be able to share that same thing with you too. So, getting right before I get into essentially the training and even more so recovery, I'd love to know before that, if you or maybe even your whole family have specific anchors, because as a busy family, and I know it's a little bit different during this time when most of us are kind of at home, maybe not doing as many outside activities, meaning more with schools and sports, those types of things. But are there specific anchors in your day or your family's day that it's like a non-negotiable and it's pretty much at like the same time? So it locks you in and brings you back to whatever you're doing, whatever craziness is going on, that you can go back to your anchors and kind of reset yourself.
I probably have a couple now that I think about it. In the morning, Laird and I try to have coffee together, even though he's up much earlier than I am. And if there's a swell, there's no chance he's long gone at dark. But otherwise, we sit and have coffee before everyone's really awake and just connect as two people. And I think that is an anchor. I actually look forward to it in the morning. And then my training is a real anchor for me because I feel like it sometimes just training and even being a little uncomfortable, I think for me is like, oh, there I am. It strips away everything and it just gets right down to business. Today I did a drill this morning that was very hard. It's one of those things like, it's just me as a human organism, no titles, no, nothing. Just so something about that is very anchoring because I'm very clear with myself at that point. It's like the curtain. I always say, like, you got to touch the curtain. You have to know where that discomfort is. You have to know how you react in that discomfort, because also you can transfer that. So when I come in and if I'm on work calls or I'm dealing with my kids who maybe they're driving me nuts, I'm like, oh yeah, discomfort. How am I going to react? Am I going to flip out? Or am I going to do it like how I did in the drill today, where it was like flipping out's not going to help me. I got to deal with this. So that's a practice, like a constant practice of like touching discomfort to keep me anchored. And then we have family dinner. That's great. We're a family dinner, whether we're in quarantine or not. And then for people listening, I always say when I'm in the car by myself, I have learned sometimes I don't listen to anything. Sometimes it's a great learning time, but otherwise I actually use that time for a check-in. Like, how am I feeling? Is anything bothering me? Do I need to have any conversations with anyone? Laird has taught me something really important, which is clear the decks every day. There's not one thing that's ever swept under the rug, ever. I would like to more often, for sure. And he is a clear the decks guy. And so it has really taught me about just surveying and checking in. And I'm very matter of fact about it. I'm not so woo-woo about it, but I think that has really been helpful to just staying, when you talk about being anchored or tethered, because then you're just clear about also, well, why am I reacting so much? Because it's not really about this phone call. It's about this other thing that I haven't dealt with. So I think it's kind of those things, those practices.
Those are great. And I think it's actually very healthy to be able to clear that deck by the end of the day, because if you allow it to disturb your sleep or you allow it to then flow into the next day, it actually changes stress hormones and neurotransmitters in your body. You're not going to get as much deep sleep and REM sleep. Then it's going to affect your cognitive ability or ability to even say yes to that workout the next day. I think one of the reasons why exercise and doing something hard, like you just talked about, kind of touching that curtain and doing something that's uncomfortable. The interesting thing about that is that nobody's making you do that, right? Nobody said you have to do that. It's your choice. So you're actually choosing to do something uncomfortable. And in that moment, you're saying to yourself, I'm willing to struggle. Like, I'm willing to put myself through this to see if I can accomplish it. And it's those kind of daily achievements with doing something hard in terms of, let's just say, exercise, or even just most people's workday. It's saying like, listen, I didn't always want to do it, but I did it anyway. And because of that, it hardens you in a good way. That the next challenge or obstacle that comes along, say, listen, I'm ready to tackle this as well. So I think there's a lot to exercise that people overlook, the mindset aspect to it, that doing something every day that's a little bit challenging. Do you work out every day, or do you do something every day in terms of workout recovery, or do you take a day off?
I mean, listen, I usually end up taking a day off when my work schedule won't permit a window, but I will try to move my body if I'm feeling good and my schedule permits 6 days a week. And last night, for example, before I went to bed, after I fed everybody, I actually went in our sauna. And I never do that because Laird's always saying, like, do you want to go in the sauna? Because I'm not the best sleeper in the world because the wheel spins a little bit. And he's like, why don't you go in the sauna? He's the best person for those types of practices I've ever seen. And I'm like, after dinner, I'm already hot. I don't want to like get in the sauna and be hot. It's like all this weird stuff. And so I'm trying to work on that, but also like on an off day, let's say, is we have the luxury of having an ice machine in our house. So we will maybe do 3 rounds, let's say, of heat and ice together. So 15 minutes in the sauna, 3 minutes in ice or thereabouts, and go back and forth. So to do that active recovery. Also, I'm not as rigid as someone might think. Like if I'm so stacked up, not only do I not train, I refuse to beat myself up over it. I refuse because it's so unproductive. And it's not like it's going to get me to train. So why am I killing myself? So when I train, I train. When I don't, I don't. And if I have to tighten it up with eating, because let's say I go, like Laird and I just had a business thing that we did for 2 weeks, 7 hours a day, 1 hour calls, and with a 15-minute gap in between, 7 each day. And it was like, yeah, cool. If I can do something 30 minutes at the end of the day, great. And if I can't, then I'm going to be real tight on my eating and I'm going to get to bed early because that's what it is.
I mean, I think that's the healthiest way to look at it, especially from someone that's been doing it for a long period of time, meaning that you have the luxury of, I would say, your metabolism's never set. But since you don't take a lot of time off and you've been doing it for a while, you're able to kind of play with things a little bit. I mean, in the beginning, I can't recommend enough. People stay locked in, and it's almost like do it at the same time 7 days a week. Now, some days are going to be going for a walk at that time or foam rolling or whatever it is. You mark out that particular half hour for yourself each and every day so that you don't lose it. I've always been 4 to 5 days a week. That's been realistic with my schedule. And again, like you said, if I'm traveling, if I'm whatever's going on, if I can get a little something in when I get to that hotel gym, then great. If not, it's okay. I have a specific purpose right now, and I'll get back to my exercise when I get home. But since I've been in quarantine, I've actually been trying to do a little something every day around the same time. And I think it's remarkable because we all have these diurnal rhythms. And if you can get your body set to exercise at a certain time, eat at a certain time, recover at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time, your body actually will alert you like, oh no, it's time to actually get moving. And so I've really enjoyed it. Now, every day, of course, is not a hard workout, but I've been alternating anaerobic days, aerobic days, playing with that. And we just got a big barrel sauna up here in Maine. And so that's been a lot of fun, even though it's hot. Getting in there, it only takes like 20 minutes to heat up when it's already 90 degrees out, and really just experimenting with more sauna, even in the summer, even in the heat. Can't wait in the winter when there's snow on the ground and I'm in the sauna, and then I get out there, lay in the snow for a few minutes or so, just like you were talking about. I would love to obviously get your take on that, and tell us a little bit about XPT, because I do want to know the origins and kind of what it's morphed into, and then start to get a little bit more. We'll talk about the recovery part of it, because although, again, I love the training, what I think we're going to hear more about in the future is the recovery, because there's a lot of great workout programs out there. XPT is a little bit different in what you're having people do, working on breath control, working on CO2, etc. But you can't train hard, have a family, not get enough sleep, be stressed at work, and think you're just going to keep doing that forever. You have to work on recovery. It's just as important as the exercise.
So the premise of XPT is breathe, move, and recover. A lot of this, I always say, Laird is our creative motor behind a lot of things that we do. And he's more curious and experimental. Like there's a linear aspect to me where, okay, just tell me, I'll lock and load and go. And he's like, well, what's that? What about this? And that's why he's able to perform the level he can for as long as he can. But so breathing is the essence of life, right? And if you talk to a surfer who they ride, 80-foot waves, when you've been held under, breathing is really means something different to you. And then breathing correctly. So, nose breathing, if you're not sprinting, if you're sitting at your desk, nose breathing, keeping your CO2 high enough that you can absorb the oxygen. Okay, movement, because we're primal beings and we need to move our body and we're meant to move. And I always say, for me personally, it's also like the easiest therapy ever. Eating well and movement, no matter what my childhood issues are, I'm joking, I don't need to solve it. I'm okay with it. Like, in a way, sometimes it's like I could sit in a chair and talk about my feelings, about all the things that frustrate me or aren't right. But sometimes if I move, it's like, okay, yeah, I can just deal with it. It's not a big deal. And then the recovery point, which is your part that you're talking about, is Laird really was of the big belief. Like, if you talk to somebody and you go, hey, do you have a recovery day? Yeah, I don't train at all on Wednesday. Oh, okay, but that's not participating in your recovery. And also, I'll take it a step further, which is, the flywheel component. You hear a lot of that in business. And, if you read any book about Jeff Bezos or Amazon, they talk about this flywheel, right? And Laird is like, it's all the spokes in the tire. So who you're with, what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're saying, when you go to bed. He is so intense that if you say recovery, he'll say all of that is part of your recovery. Yeah, heat and ice, that's great. Mobility exercises to oxygenate and get blood into that tissue and into the, fascial tissue and all that. That's all great. But what he believes, and I think it's right, especially as I go on in life, is that if I have an unhealthy friendship with somebody, or I talk smack about somebody, or I stay up late, or I'm constantly watching the news, or I'm like sucked in this weird space, this is actually, I'm not participating in my recovery. Because I think it's like that we don't realize, like, it's not just from exercise. It's like we have to heal from living all the time. So how do we do that with the words we speak, and including the food we're eating and kettlebells that we're swinging? So it's like, it's actually broadening that. And you said it earlier, where it's all connected, right? Like, it's your work and your family and your relationships and what you're doing with your free time and what you're consuming your thoughts with. Like, if you really want to start notching it up and start moving into these other areas, it's like you have to realize, and I think it's important to compartmentalize. I'm able to do that. Like, I'm having a tough day, but I still have to execute in business. So I'm not saying not being able to compartmentalize, but recognizing everything as a flywheel all the time. And that you could stay up till 11 o'clock, but if you want to support yourself, even in your recovery, then you'll find the way to get to bed, and that it's not separate. And if you have a dynamic with a person that's unhealthy, that's connected to like whatever food you're putting in your mouth, and getting people, when they talk about a holistic lifestyle. So, and we do it in a very matter-of-fact way. But I think with XPT, it was this idea of like, hey, if we're going to share information, then we have to share the responsibility of actively supporting yourself and participating in your recovery.
People think about it, I think, and they make it overcomplicated, meaning the more you do in life and the more you put out, the more you really need to take in terms of recovery. And that's good food, it's sleep, it's really balancing the nervous system. And since we can't see the nervous system, most people don't give it a second thought. But I like to think of it as that you're either catabolic or anabolic. You're either breaking down or you're building back up. And every time you do all of these great workouts and you travel and you stay up late, you have fun with friends, you drink some alcohol, whatever it might be, all of these things are just slowly breaking down the bottle. I call it filling up the rain barrel. Eventually that overflows. You don't know what day that's going to be. Mine was, I was 17 years old. Mine happened earlier than a lot of people, but it happens to everybody, whether you're 40 something years old, 50 something year old. If you have better genetics, you wait longer, right? But if your genetics aren't as great, you have more input, you're going to break down faster. So for me, recovery is all about the nervous system. And just like you were saying, later was saying, if you have toxic relationships or you just had a bad day, all of that is stress on the nervous system. Now you put in a hard workout, you really then have to look at what I refer to as the de-stress protocol. So I call it 8 spokes. It's diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest. It's the parasympathetic activity with that rest and sleep, emotional balance, supplements, and success mindset. But now when I look at that, it's stress, emotions, and success mindset. 3 of those are with the mind. And I think that's greatly overlooked, because you can be doing everything right, but if you have high levels of cortisol, high levels of norepinephrine, high levels of dopamine, and you're always going, and you eat well and you exercise, you're just as likely to have cardiovascular issues as the person who eats really well, or, if you did eat well. So I like to look at it as total input. And although I enjoy sauna and I enjoy walking and binaural beats, other people might find their recovery talking with a friend at night or watching their favorite TV show. So I think there's a little bit of give and take to it. There's something that you need to do for the body and something that you need to do for the mind. What are some of the things that you do for the body in XPT beyond sauna and cold-based therapy? What's some of your other favorite modalities?
Well, to be honest, we have a pool training modality, and that came out of trying to figure out, how do I work as hard as I possibly can work, whether it's in a hypoxic training or ballistic with weights jumping out of the deep end. So this was a version of, I can't just keep pounding myself. And same with Laird. Laird has an artificial hip. I have an artificial knee. How can I keep going at that high level, but do it in a smarter way? So that is a version of, that's really where pool training came in. Yes, people could say, oh, Laird was trying to figure out how to improve lung capacity and motion through water by, he swims with dumbbells. But ultimately what you see is something's going to give. It's like runners, and you talk about like the age 35. There's a great graph I saw once about people who run, and then you see 35 and it just like plummets straight down, because it's like really very few of us are built, unless you're going to run on sand, on grass, barefoot, and how light are your bones, whatever. Running, it's like long distances, you're going to pay at some point. Most everybody. There's always that one or two, few that you look at me and you go, that's a runner. Wow, weird. Okay. And so I think that's one of them. And here's the other part of XPT that I think is really important. You got to keep changing it up. If you think you've arrived at anywhere, at knowing anything, like we don't think this, or that you're not open to new information. So it's a weird balance of staying open to new information, but not bouncing, right? Like at some point you have to commit a kind of enough time to something to see how it really makes you feel, to get good enough at it, to even understand it and have a relationship with whatever modality or nutritional program you're on. But then at some point you just have to stay open. And it's amazing how a person or a book or something will come along and it will hit you. And you'll be like, okay, that's for me. That resonates with me. I'm going to check that out. So I think it's always about staying curious and adapting, because people get locked and loaded. And then it's like, oh, this is what I do. It's like, okay, but then it's not going to be effective anymore. So the other really important part of XPT is stay open. And hopefully, like we always say with the experience, what we're saying now, hopefully will be a little different if you came in a year. Hopefully we're actually wrong maybe about some of this. And we're going to keep learning and keep paying attention and keep being students so that we have something new. So I think that that's actually weirdly a part of it, because if we say, hey, lifestyle, then it can't be like, this is the way. It's ultimately a conversation to say to people, how can you get it done? You hate the gym? Great. What do you want to do outside? Oh, you don't like kale? Great. Okay, how can you eat in a way that supports you? And if you ask me about XPT, it would be like, yes, we have to be hydrated, go to bed early. Yeah, these things are never going to really change. Mm-hmm. But within that, get you to know yourself well enough to say, I'm going to build this support self-care life in all the ways that it looks, because that's my jam and that's what I can do every day. And stay open, because if you do one thing over and over, you're just going to hammer yourself and you're not going to get results.
Yeah, I think that's great. A couple of things, and I think that I've heard you go back to this theme a few times now, and it's something that I really am passionate about. It's being self-aware. It's really it's checking in with yourself. But this is not common knowledge. I mean, it's really not. I mean, people don't ever stop to think, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Can I change how I feel? They think that they're locked in that moment and that they're a victim of their thoughts and they're a victim of essentially the way that they live. And it's cyclical. It just keeps continuing, which it is, until you decide to break the cycle. But I didn't really plan on asking this, but I would love you to just essentially expound on this, because you've gone back to kind of checking in with yourself a lot now. And even with business too, like, hey, here's what we're doing right now. We think we're doing it correctly, which I'm sure that you are, but then there's building off of it, right? It's like, but can we get better? Can we improve? What's the next level? So it's like this self-awareness coupled with a growth mindset. And if people have that, it's so difficult not to be successful in terms of many different areas of life because you're staying open. So I would love to hear you, as we begin to wrap up, just talk about this self-awareness, talk about maybe even where it came from. How did you learn it? And I'm a huge advocate of reading and of books. You mentioned books a little bit there. And it's because you can't go online, read a 2,000-word article, and then you're an expert in it. You need to actually get deeper and really, whether it's listening to long-form podcasts or it's reading some books on a subject, to begin to get deeper. Maybe talk about the self-awareness aspect. And if there's a good book that you could share with people, I'd love to hear that as well.
I want to start off by saying I'm very fortunate to actually have a built-in person in my house who naturally, when people spend time in nature, I think that a lot of times they're grounded to things more easily. They're sort of governed by universal law more. And so I live with somebody where, Laird's susceptibility to white noise is far less than myself. Okay. So I've spent 25 years with somebody there's a primalness and a clarity that I kind of borrow because I'm like, oh, that seems to kind of work. And I've gotten confused and bogged down by this world, this very loud world that I live in, and people's chirping instead of trying to simplify. So I think when we talk about self-awareness, what I am really interested in doing is creating a big life. What does that mean? It means dynamic and rich relationships and challenges, professional challenges, and seeing how far we can go. But simultaneously always simplifying, constantly simplifying conflicts with people, wasting time, just really keeping it simple. So, you're firmly rooted in the ground and you're reaching high, right? So I will say I have that built in my home, which makes it easier because this is a person who doesn't hide their feelings, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not. It's like, and so I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's interesting. And it's never about being politically correct. Laird was raised in Hawaii. There was never a thing of like how you should act, right? You should be honest and you should help someone if they need it and all of these things. So that makes it easy. I think also somewhere in there, I got really in touch early with, I knew what was going to make me feel good and feel happy. And it wasn't going to be more stuff. And it wasn't going to be having what was a perfect life. It was going to be having, first of all, I was going to be working hard so that I could respect myself. I knew that was going to be something important, that I needed to earn it, whatever it is, that I felt like, okay, hard work, but that I really wanted to have meaningful and deep relationships. And I desperately wanted challenge. Like I like to work hard, and I don't mean like in the pool. I mean, in business, I like to have setbacks and overcome those types of things. There's another layer. So once I started having children, and especially my middle daughter, when she became a teenager, trying to think that you understand or know anything really holds you back. And so I've never felt like I needed to let everyone, like I had some answers. I'm willing to share my experience. And if any of that makes sense to somebody, because I've had kind of a few, or I'm older than somebody, I'm happy to share it. But what I've always known is that I really don't know much. I listen to my instincts. If I make a mistake, I try to just say it quickly, like I made a mistake. So I'm liberated from trying to pretend that I hadn't. And I think that comes from really playing sports. You don't hide. Your coach is on your teammates are on your, like, okay, I blew it. I'm accountable. So I think when people don't do this, it's because when we have to check in, it's scary. By the way, like maybe you're going to see something about yourself you don't like. Maybe you're going to have a friend that you're like, I got to get rid of this person, right? So checking in is like, can be scary. But what's cool is once you excavate and you do that enough times, the uncomfortable part, now you're working from a place where it's so quick. Here comes something, boom, I'm going to deal with it. It's like having a decent diet and exercise. All of a sudden you get out of you go, oh, I can correct that. Boom. I know what's going on. So I think for me, it was just about like, I don't want to myself and I don't want to be people. And I think that makes it a lot easier. And what happens is people really take you, that's not the expectation, right? You don't create those expectations. But if people are afraid to look in, than they really need to, right? Like if you need to apologize to somebody, whatever we need to do, just like roll your sleeves up and get into it and do it, because it's very liberating and it's wiggling at our back of our head. It's impacting our health. And that's why when I see this, and I know you've seen this, people who are really rigid about their exercise and diet, some of them are equally as unhealthy as somebody who just sits on the couch and eats chips because they're so rigid. And it's like, no, I have to do this and I can't do that. It's like, oh, we're talking about being adaptable humans. And that when we make an error, we go, my bad. When it's just, and to stay open, because all the new information and the right people, the right teachers, they'll show up when you really need it. And just have that one or two good people that you can say, wow, I'm having a bad day today. And you know what? I'm really scared. Like I feel scared about the future. I feel scared about how my kids are growing up. Okay. Just having that, because I think that once we understand that also biologically, we're anxious beings. Like that's why I always say it's interesting. People should get to know themselves on that intimate way, because when stuff happens, you can be like, oh yeah, this is also connected to my biology. It's normal, but I don't need this right now. And just things like that. Or I even have it where now I've gotten to a place where if I run into two bad situations with people, like I'll be like, oh, I need to stop moving right now. The universe is like telling me something because something's going on with me, that I've attracted these two dynamics in like a very short order. You better just stop and take a look, because we don't realize what fires we feed. And then it comes right for us. And so when you talk about self-awareness, so I think for me, when I talk about self-care and trying to really kick, like for real, be kicked, like if you say, like, I want to go in the world and be a warrior, I think it's helpful to also show how wildly flawed you are every day, because then you're not afraid of it.
I think sports is very humbling. It's very difficult to be the best in the world at what you do. And it's even if you are, which is, again, fractions of 1%, it's very difficult to maintain that through an entire career. So that's why sports and exercise and hard work, even manual labor, as well as a difficult job, it allows you to be humbled. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you accept that and understand that it's part of the process. Because, the goal to me is, I learned this many years ago now, and I'm very happy about that, is that you set these goals and you achieve them. And that's fantastic. It's something that you never thought would happen before and you did it. And then what happens next? Well, you set a new goal. And so you begin to realize it's not just the journey. It's a nice way of saying that. I love the cliche. It's great. But it's really the reward is actually in the growth. It's understanding yourself to a far greater degree, seeing what level you're at now, what level you can push yourself to. And this used to be your breaking point before. But now, actually, with all those hermetic stressors, you're up to here now. And so a lot of that comes, yes, it comes with physical work and all of those things, but honestly, it really is more mental. And I think and people know it. And that's why they gravitate to a lot of these inspirational people out there. I won't name names right now, but they're doing things that don't necessarily seem human. Now, are they healthy for the human body running 200 miles, those types of things? Absolutely not. That is not healthy for the human body, no matter how you slice it, but it's inspiring because it's showing that how is that even possible to run that long, that far within a couple days, time span. So one thing I'd love to hear is what's next for Gabby Reece? What's next for you? Not just career-wise, but where do you see yourself moving? Not your 5-year plan or anything, but what's that next evolution for you?
I felt like I've really dedicated some time to my family as I should, and then to XPT, and we have a coffee and creamer business that I've dedicated quite a lot of time to. And I feel like now I'm more ready to go back to communication. And when I say that, like continuing to expand my own practice, as far as like, when I say my self-care practice, maybe experiment with newer, different things if I have a little bit more time. And I hate to say this, I can't believe I'm saying these words, but also to try to figure out how to have a little more fun, because I'm not a fun-seeking person at all. Like, give me a work list and let's go. And so I really have started to recognize that I think sometimes just to do things just because. Like, I'm always like, it's funny, like, I will be like, that's why I was a good competitor, because it was about like, what's the goal to win? Like, if you said, hey, do you want to go play volleyball for fun? I'd be like, yeah, no. There's a limitation in that. So to have more fun, but to also now probably generate a little more focus back in my own work. And I know this is something really important, especially for your female listeners, honestly. And I know this is harsh, but it's important. When I say about the other things about also like simplifying your life and keeping it simple and staying positive, with that simultaneously also comes having to be actually more harsh. And so I only say that because for women, we have a really hard time with that. But if like some relationship or something is like, it's not good, then there you have, in order to be around people that bring out the best in you and you're doing that. Also, there's a flip side, which is like, this situation makes me uncomfortable. I love you, but I'm not doing this. And women have a very hard time with that. And let's say you're a boss and you have an employee that like, it's just not working. And there's been 3 or 4 conversations. You actually have to take it on and be like, I'm so sorry. This just isn't working. Like we were clear about what needed to happen and it didn't. And so it's just not going to work. And so what I want to say is simultaneously, and that's me too, going forward, always, I've been trying to practice this for like the last 5 years, more loving, more empathetic, more fun, more this. And also with that comes, because you're not going to screw around in like the BS. And so that is a really confusing space for a lot of us, especially females, because we want to please everybody. And it's not possible. It just isn't.
No, and I think it's valuing yourself as much as anybody else, meaning nobody's more valuable than you. That's just not how life works. That is something we might give to ourselves because of our upbringing, our community, whatever it might be. But I think that's really important advice, especially like you said, for our female listeners.
It doesn't make you a bad person to have to own the truth. And if you're especially a boss lady, then you're going to have to say uncomfortable things, and it doesn't make you a bad person.
No, I think if you're living your truth, you're not doing it to be mean-spirited or any way, but you're just saying, listen, this is important to me. I'm sorry if it's not as important to you, and I need to be making sure that I'm following my passion, my purpose, while not hurting anyone else in the process as well. I mean, that's always the goal, I think, is to, one of my favorite lines, and I always do quote it, but it's, I'll take care of me for you if you take care of you for me. And it's one of the best things I think that people can do in a relationship as well. It's a little different with kids, of course, but when you're working one-on-one with another adult, I mean, you have to have work relationships, you have to have all of those things, but you need to know what the other person values. Try to allow them to do that, what motivates them, what they seek. And if the person's not willing and you're able to switch the situation, switch the situation. It's like you have to value yourself as much as anybody else.
Life is short.
It is short. It is short. So you have your newer podcast, 6, 7 months, 8 months old, we'll say right now. You're doing an interview style, interviewing a lot of people. Can tell a little bit more for my community about what they would get out of listening to your show as well.
So the Gabby Reece show, because I'm not that original, this is my thing. Like if I was going to talk to you, your life's experience and your pursuit of excellence in your profession, like I have neuroscientists to this week is Mark Sisson, who created Primal Kitchen and wrote Primal Blueprint. And he's been married for 30 years. What I'm interested in is there's so many things that a lot of us who can accomplish some things, there's almost parts of us that can phone that in. What I have become so interested in is how does that greatness, whatever that greatness is, that excellence that you've been able to accomplish, have you been able to take lessons on the one to help you function really better in your everyday living life? Because what I have noticed for me personally, so I know it's not unique, is to be the best wife and friend and parent is a lot more difficult than hitting a volleyball and, showing up and doing whatever. And it's not that those things don't have stress around them. It's just, how do I marry that idea of the pursuit of personal excellence everywhere, which means having conversations with people who will say, oh yeah, I totally wasn't good at that or comfortable with that. So for me, it's learning about, if they have self-care tips, great. But it's also reminding people that to be really great, you can also say, I don't know. It makes me uncomfortable. I have failed and I'm going to keep trying, because those are the conversations I would like to have, because I know a lot of people have answers, but I think it's really important to remind people that they're not alone in the pursuit of whatever it is that they're going through, and that is part of it. Like you said,
that and that every successful person that you might look up to or might be a role model, you think they have it all figured out, that they're still trying to figure out their everyday life just like anyone else. They might be at a certain level that you aspire to, but they went through their own struggles and they have struggles today. And so I think it really, these types of interviews really humanize people, and they allow you to connect with, I would say, your audience on a deeper level, because you're showing all of the positive, because a lot of people have figured things out. Like Mark Sisson, he's figured a lot out. He's been on this earth for longer than us. He has more experience. He's been part of the diet world for, of course, many more years, and ran a successful company. So I think those kind of conversations, I mean, are just, that's what people need more of. Less reality TV, more real people listening on podcasts and that. So it was a pleasure having you on today. I could ask you easily an hour more questions, but I respect your time here today. Where can my community find out and connect more with you online?
I'm on mostly Instagram, Gabby Reece, GabbyReece. And my podcast is The Gabby Reece Show. And the other thing I would remind people is that it's cool to glean inspiration from people, but that at the end of the day, that's when you talk about that checking in with oneself. If we are going to reach a level or have moments, let's say, of happiness and peace and all these things, that ultimately the real reason to check in with yourself is so that you really know what makes you feel good and how you're going to be successful. Not like, okay, well, the doc does it like that, or Gabby's doing it like that. That's cool. And that can be used for like fodder, but really to encourage people to well, what do you want? Because if we can figure out even parts of that, that's pretty good.
That's the ultimate question right there. Thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate all the wisdom and advice you've shared here today. Take care. Thanks so much for just tuning into the show. And before you go, we have to make sure you hear about what is going on over at equilibriumnutrition.com this week. It is, in my personal opinion, imperative that we begin to take control of our immune system and our overall health like we never have before, as we begin to go into cough, cold, flu season. That means that it is at this time of the year that our body's going to get a little less vitamin D, that there's going to be a little bit more stress with back to school, back to work, all back to the schedules. And with the colder weather, this means that our immune system may need a boost. It's also why I personally use the products I'm about to talk with you here today. I use the alkalizing vitamin C, I use the Balance Zinc, and I use the vitamin D3 on a daily basis, in addition to my daily foundational protocol. I spoke about exactly what I do, if you want to check it out, what I do when I get sick over at StephenCabral.com/1671. Just a couple weeks ago, I did that show. I outlined exactly what I do. And really honest, I say I try to use as few nutritional supplements as possible. That doesn't mean I don't use any, but here's what I'm doing right now. Here's why I'm using them. And I can't tell you exactly what to do for you, but what I can share is this is why I do it. This is why I recommend it to my family. And this is why I'm recommending it to our global health-based community this year. So you can do your daily foundational protocol, and then you can add on the immunity protocol at a very inexpensive price, especially for what it can do for you. And what we're doing this week is we're giving you a $15 credit back on your account. So that means you can use that $15 in the future to really whatever you'd like. So head on over to equilibriumnutrition.com while supplies last for that immunity protocol, while the offer is valid, as I have to say, and you can get $15 back as a credit on your account for a future purchase by purchasing the immunity protocol this week. Take care, everyone. Be well. I'll talk with you soon.